the organizers for having me. I realized this morning that the last time I was in London was when I applied and interviewed for a postdoctoral position. And I got the job, but I didn't take it. But now I'm coming back 15 years later, and so it's good to definitely come back. Okay, we're going to talk about reading today, and we'll start talking about the typical and atypical reading brain and reading development in general. The way I'm doing my talks usually is I'm tailoring it to the person in the room that knows the least about the brain imaging reading development. So if you have some higher level questions, then we can definitely discuss them later. We'll talk about the dyslexia paradox, which is the discrepancy between when the dyslexia is usually diagnosed and when the most effective window is for intervention. Then we'll talk about our longitudinal studies. We have 3 longitudinal studies going on that follow children from infancy all the way to middle school and look at early language and reading development using primarily structural and functional MRI. And then we'll talk about our work in early screening, which is in collaboration with a lot of teachers, a lot of schools, school districts, and on the policy level in Beacon Hill and Massachusetts State. And then about the educational and curricular implications. Okay, so to bring everyone on the same page, this is a very broad outline about reading development. And when I usually ask people, when does reading development start? Usually people answer, maybe preschool, maybe the first day of kindergarten. But when you really think about it, reading starts in utero, because the fundamental first milestone of reading is language development, auditory processing, and that starts in utero, okay? So we'll start in utero with sound and language processing as well as visual processing after birth. Then when the children are in preschool, early kindergarten, so when I talk about kindergarten, I mean the American system. So in America, you start kindergarten when you're 5 by September 1st. And that's the first year of active, really formal reading instruction. So it's different from some other countries. During preschool, which is the year before kindergarten, children have to start mastering what we call phonological awareness or phonemic awareness, which is the ability to manipulate the sounds of language. And I give you some examples. So that can be done very basic with the little ones, do 2 words rhyme, or say the word cowboy without cow. And then it can get more advanced, say the word banana without b, or say the word fixed without k. Right? So you see the different levels here. This is all phonological phonemic awareness. Also, letter recognition is a very important milestone. Then in kindergarten, early elementary school, we have to map these sounds that we acquired over all these years to the letter counterparts, the written counterparts, which we call grapheme phoneme mapping. Then we start reading single words, reading sentences and connected text. And the ultimate goal of reading development is reading complex text, reading it fluently, and comprehending what you read. So we have a shift from learning to read to reading to learn, at least in the US, around 2nd to 3rd grade. And that's a really important shift because in 3rd grade, usually the teachers stop doing active reading instruction, meaning up until 3rd grade, you learn what the 2 vowel combinations, what kind of sounds they can make, etc., etc. But after that, you're on your own, and you have to read to learn. So I just want to put this on the table here, because if you're not reading well by 3rd grade, from there on it's going to go downhill, right? Because you're not getting any active instruction anymore, it's just reading to learn. What people often forget is that reading is not just the phonological awareness and the decoding, it has a large language component. And I give you an example. There may be children, and we see them a lot, who come from very low socioeconomic status families. And they may enter kindergarten with a vocabulary of 500 words. Okay, so there have been some studies in rural Alabama showing usually you have about 10,000 words when you start kindergarten. These kids start kindergarten with about 500 words. Okay, when they start reading, let's say they're fine with knowledge awareness, they're fine with decoding, but at one point they get to text where half of the words they don't understand. They can decode it, but they don't understand because they don't have the vocabulary. Or parents in the home may speak in very short sentences, no comma, just very simple sentences. Then in second, third grade, the child encounters long garden path sentences, etc. And these kids may have the decoding abilities, but they have problems with fluency and comprehension because of their language skills, not necessarily of their decoding skills. Okay, so that's an important distinction that people often forget. Childhood reading skills. The reading is one of the primary goals of elementary education, but the recent numbers in the U.S. show that 63% of fourth graders in the U.S. are not reading on grade level. All right? If you look at low socioeconomic background children, these are 80%. So it's a real reading crisis. This can lead to severe psychological and clinical implications. So depression, you see anxiety, you often see low self-esteem, etc. And then adulthood, you often see them not finishing high school, not starting college, or there's even estimates that about 30 to 40% of inmates in the United States have a language-based learning disability. We also see that they, in general, make a lot less money if they enter the workforce. And this is some older numbers, that's why we have pounds here, but in the UK, the annual cost of dyslexia has been estimated as high as $1.6 billion. All right? So, 70% of children who are poor readers in first grade remain poor readers in ninth grade. Okay? So that's another problem. They are poor readers from the beginning, and whatever interventions we give them, they just remain poor readers. So there's different problems here I'm trying to outline. The initial problem of having the difficulty of learning to read, but then also the failure of the system not detecting them early or giving them the wrong interventions. So here is an example of what this can do to your lifelong cognition and learning in general. So as I said before, in kindergarten, children usually start with about 10,000 words. These are primarily acquired through talking to your parents, maybe talking to your siblings. Usually the bad words come from the siblings. But so you get about 10,000 words when you start kindergarten. By fifth grade, if you're a proficient reader, you have 60,000 words. So you added about 250 words per week. And research has shown that this is primarily achieved by reading. You accessing new text, which then adds vocabulary. It's also through teaching, of course, but a big chunk comes from reading itself. All right, so this is a really great study that just came out a couple of days, or I think 2 weeks ago, that actually in a twin sample showed that the children's reading ability that determines how much they choose to read, not vice versa. Okay, so if the children are poor readers, they read less, which then leads to low vocabulary, etc., etc. So it has been estimated that students in the 90th percentile read as much in an entire year outside of school. Let me start again. Students at the 90th percentile may read as many words in 3 days as a child at the 10th percentile read in an entire year outside. Okay, so where does this atypical reading come from? So we'll look at genetics, we'll look at the brain, perception, cognition, and the environment. So what is developmental dyslexia? So if you ask 10 different people in 10 different professions, you get 10 different answers. And so this is the definition I brought today from the International Dyslexia Association. So the affects about 10 to 12% of children. It's a specific learning disability with a neurobiological aberration, which is characterized on the word level, meaning you have difficulties with accurate and fluent word recognition, not with comprehension, not with fluency. These are the consequences. Dyslexia is defined on the word level, poor spelling and decoding abilities. So you're probably asking, like, wait a second, but she said 63% are fourth graders are not reading at grade level. Where do the other percentage come from? So what we define here is reading disability. Dyslexia is one reading disability, but there are also other reading disabilities, especially as a result of environmental circumstances, okay, like I explained before. Do they need other interventions? We'll discuss this later. Let's look at the genetics. If you have an older brother, an older sister, or a parent with dyslexia, you have a 50% chance to develop dyslexia yourself. So this is very high. If you have twins, as you can see, it's 68%. If you have two parents, it can go up all the way to 75%. There have been several genes that have been reported to be candidate genes. So there will never be, I think, a dyslexia gene. But these genes have been shown to be dyslexia susceptibility genes, and most of these genes are involved in early brain development in utero. Okay, so we are talking about neural migration here, axonal growth, etc. So the idea here is that there is varying function in these these dyslexia susceptibility genes, which then leads to an atypical development of the cortex in utero, which then influence development subsequent. So let's look at the brain. This is my favorite quote by Steven Pinker, who said, "Children are wired for sound, but print is an optional accessory that must be painstakingly molded on." What he means by this is, we are not born, we are not made to read. Okay, so this is an artificial skill, relatively new in our evolutionary history. What we have to do is we have to repurpose networks in our brain that are initially developed for something different, like vision or sound processing, etc. And we have to form a new network, the reading network, or reading networks. Okay. So just a short excursus for people in the room who may not be so familiar with the brain. So you see the brain here from the left-hand side. This is the front, this is the back, this is the top, and this is the bottom. Green part, primarily visual processing, or called the occipital lobe. Orange, temporal lobe, primarily sound, language processing. Then we have the purple here, the parietal lobe, which in reading does a lot of the mapping of the sounds onto the written content, especially in early reading development. And then we have the prefrontal cortex here, which are often called the CEO of the reading network, because it basically does what a CEO does in a company. It plans ahead, it integrates things in the bigger picture, so it's very involved in reading fluency, comprehension, text analysis, etc. Okay, so let's look at the reading network. Again, this is the brain from the left-hand side, and don't go home and say, oh, the reading network only has 4 components there in the left side, and there's nothing in the right. No, I'm showing you the primary regions of the reading network, all right? So we have here the fusiform gyrus, or often also called the visual word form area, or also called the letterbox of the brain. And what it does is it's very fine-tuned and specific to letters. And it's an experience-driven plasticity, meaning if you are not reading yet, you do not have specificity for letters, but after reading instruction, you develop specificity in this region. If you learn to read in here, you respond to our alphabet, but not to the Hebrew alphabet, etc. And then we have, as already described here, the temporal lobe for sound and language processing, the inferior frontal gyrus, primarily involved in higher order analyses, as well as reading fluency, comprehension, and here the perisylvian region, so this is called the sylvian fissure, and so peri is Latin for surrounding, so surrounding the sylvian region you see also areas that are primarily doing phonological processing, mapping sounds to the written counterparts. So you see an increase in connectivity between these two regions. The brain does not just have cortex. So in reading research, we also look a lot at white matter tracts. If you don't know what white matter tracts is, they are basically the highways of the brain. They connect two or more different brain regions, and they enable information flow. Okay, and then we can measure these, and we can see whether there's differences between children with dyslexia, for instance, or with a genetic risk or not. What research has shown for the white matter tracts here is there is reduced fractional anisotropy. So if you're not in the field, you're like, what does this mean? We don't know exactly what FA measures yet, but I give you some examples. So you may have a highway with 4 lanes. If you have reduced FA, let's say FA for now, you may have only 2 lanes. But it could also be that instead of the 2 lanes, you still have 4 lanes, but the lanes are bumpier because the myelin that isolates, that makes information flow fast, is less developed. Okay, so you have a bumpy surface of your highway. Or it could be that you have a lot of crossing fibers, almost like traffic lights on your highway, which also makes information flow very slow. So we'll talk about this, but if I say reduced FA could mean any of these things. This is an overview that we published 2 years ago that shows the atypical brain development in children and adults with dyslexia compared to their peers. So these are all adults or children who already have the diagnosis of dyslexia. So if you look at volume, so almost like counting neurons, it's not as easy. What we do basically is we have an image and we look at the pixels in the image and see how many are gray and how many are white. So if you do this, very basic description here, but pretty much what we do, you see that there's reduced gray matter volume in these regions of the reading network in children and adults with dyslexia compared to their peers. I already talked about white matter, so there are these important white matter tracts, especially these 4 here. In red, it's called the arcuate fasciculus, which is really important in language, so you often see problems with phonological processing or reading when you have a stroke that affects the arcuate fasciculus. People have shown that if you're an adult and you're illiterate and you learn to read, that your FA changes, it increases in your arcuate fasciculus, but also I'll show you later, it correlates with reading during the developmental phase. And then we have other tracts here, for instance, in blue here, the left inferior longitudinal fasciculus, which directly connects the letter box of the visual workshop area, to the inferior frontal gyrus, or the CEO of the letter box. And I'll walk you through all of this in the next couple of sections. Okay, so what motivates our studies? Our studies are primarily motivated by the dyslexia paradox. The dyslexia paradox we also call the failure approach, or the way to fail approach. And this is how it goes. Currently, you have to fail over a significant period of time in order to get a diagnosis of dyslexia or reading disability. Okay, so that means you have to fail in kindergarten, you fail in first grade, you have to fail in second grade, and if you fail for long enough, at one point you get a diagnosis which is reading failure. But you can't get a diagnosis before you're not failing. However, and I'll show you a slide, a lot of research in the last couple of years that show that the window for the most effective intervention is actually in kindergarten and first grade. Okay? So you have this paradox where you can't get a diagnosis until you fail over many years, but then the window for the most effective intervention is way, way early. So here, I'm happy to also send people the slides. There's been some really great meta-analyses showing that the effect sizes are much larger in kindergarten and first grade than in second and third grade. This study here showed that if at-risk beginning readers receive intensive instruction, remediation, 50 to 90% actually reached average reading levels, etc. So this is a lot. This is the primary motivation for the longitudinal studies I show you now. So I'll give you a little overview about the behavioral predictors of dyslexia. So there have been many, many brilliant people, especially in this country, who looked at the behavioral predictors of reading outcome. So they followed children from preschool all the way to middle school, even longer, and looked at what are the key predictors in kindergarten, preschool, first grade of later reading outcome. And what they found was, is listed here, it's phonological awareness, we already discussed. It's the ability to repeat pseudowords, so it's almost like verbal working memory. It's rapid unmatized naming, which is basically you have a set of objects or colors in rows in reading direction, and you are asking the child to name them as quickly as possible. And so this is a good test of automaticity, and is a really good predictor of reading fluency later. We have vocabulary, letter knowledge, letter sound knowledge, and what's really interesting is also the home literacy environment. So how many books do you have at home? How often is someone reading to the child? How often do you visit the library? Which explains about 8 to 12% of the variance. So it's not a big chunk, but it can add up. By the way, one way you can measure this is usually when you ask parents, at least in Boston, how many books do you have at home, they say 1,000, probably 5,000. So then what we do is we have a list of fake and real children's book titles. And we say, please indicate which ones are fake and which ones are real. So if they really read to their children a lot, they know. I have 3 children myself, so you know the books by heart and you know the titles by heart. Okay. Also, there's really great work coming out of Finland showing that familiar risk, remember 50% of kids with a familiar risk develop dyslexia, letter knowledge, phonological awareness, and rapid unmatized naming at 3.5 years predicted later dyslexia. Okay, so let's look at our studies. So we started the Boston Longitudinal Dyslexia Study, or Project BOLD, in 2008. So that's 10 years ago. We are currently not enrolling, but we are waiting, and hopefully we'll see the kids again in high school. So we're close. That's the goal. But here are some specific of the studies. So as I said, usually you get a diagnosis of dyslexia, reading difficulty, the end of second, beginning of third grade. We are trying to identify children at risk in preschool and kindergarten in Project BOLD. And then we have Project Baby BOLD, where we go all the way as young as 3 months old. We do recruit preschoolers, so this is before they ever get formal reading instruction, with and without a familiar risk of dyslexia. And then we follow them, and so the core ranks follow them from preschool all the way to the end of third grade. And so we have about 25 that we follow till 7th and 8th grade. And we're, like I said, want to see a big chunk of them in high school. We have about 165 children enrolled longitudinally. So to give you an example of what we do in the scanner. So they do 3 tasks in the scanner. When they're older, they can read, they do 4 tasks. This this one here is a phonological awareness task. So they're in the scanner, and we ask them, we give them these two words over headphones, but they also see the object. So goat, gorilla, and we ask them who they start with the same sound. It's a very classical phonemic awareness task. And then the control condition is we give them exactly the same auditory input, but this time we ask them, are they both spoken by the same gendered voice or not? Okay, so you're doing a phonological analysis in one pass, same input into the brain, voice analysis in the other part. We've published intensively on how you actually put 4-year-olds in the scanner, so I don't have to go in detail. If you look behaviorally, we see that the kids with a familiar risk show lower, as a group, remember half of them will most likely turn out fine, as a group show lower expressive receptive language, lower phonological awareness, lower rapid omatized naming. Then once they're older, you see the typical signs like lower reading fluency, single word reading, passage comprehension, etc. In Project Bold, we kept IQ, age, home literacy, and socioeconomic status constant. These are all very high SES children. We have in Boston a lot of private dyslexia schools. So these are schools where kids go to, cost a lot of money, $60,000, $70,000 a year, where they go when if they have dyslexia. And so these are the younger siblings of these, or the alumni kids. So high SES, you should keep that in mind. Okay, so one of the first studies that came out of this, so here you see first sound matching versus voice matching, that's the contrast. This means FHD plus means family history of dyslexia positive, negative, and this is a t-test. So the color here reflects voxels in the brain that show the significant effect of a certain t-value. Okay, so it's not direct activation that you see on an fMRI picture. So what we could show here is that these traditional hyperactivation that people have shown in adults and children with dyslexia, we could see in children with a familiar risk predating reading onset. So we thought, that may suggest that these kids step with their little backpacks into the first day of kindergarten with the less optimal brain to learn to read. And we're waiting 3-4 years until we give them a diagnosis, which means intensive resources. Also, we looked at the volume. Remember, I told you about the granular volume. And what we could show, so this is the left hemisphere, but you're looking through the right hemisphere onto the left hemisphere. That children with a familiar risk compared to without show less gray matter in these traditional reading regions that I introduced to you earlier, and these correlate with pre-reading skills. We wanted to know how early can we see this, and that suggested our study in babies, but also the study at Salto Pattern. So here we looked at the topography of the cortex. What this means is, if you think about topography in geography, you have mountains and you have valleys, and you have the same thing on the cortex. You have gyri and you have subtly, okay? So what we were interested in is not how high the mountain is, but where the mountain is located on the cortical surface, okay? And that's so important because it's genetically determined in utero and doesn't change anymore after birth. A little bit, but we can assume this for today. So that means if we see differences in the topography of the cortex between kids with dyslexia without familiar risk, yes, no, that means it is something that is determined in utero. And that's exactly what we showed 2 years ago. So we looked at these posterior means the back of the brain, regions in the left hemisphere that I showed you earlier have showing hyperactivation, less activation. And we could show that the topography of the cortex was different in kids with dyslexia compared to typical developing children, but also familiar risk, yes, no. We could show that more similar the topography of the cortex is compared looked at the highways, the white matter tracks. We did a cross-sectional and a longitudinal study. So in the cross-sectional, we had 78 children, 45 FHD plus, 33 FHD minus, and 45 children we follow longitudinally. So cross-sectionally, you see, so this is, let me explain these graphs here. So this is a technique called AFQ, or automatic fiber quantification. It's one of my favorite tools in imaging. Basically, it gives you all these tracks, and then it segments the tracks in 100 equal segments, and then you can compare these segments across groups. Okay, so you're not just saying, oh, the whole highway is different. You're saying, no, there's actually exit 18 that's different, and not exit 25. All right? And so we could show, so in red you have FHD plus, in blue you have FHD minus, and these areas are the significant segments. Then the pre-readers, beginning readers, and fluent readers, if we look cross-sectionally, we have almost identical segments that show lower FA indicates with a familiar risk compared to the top. So you may now say, with the familiar risk, but some of them read well later and some won't, can she just compare good readers versus poor readers? And that's what we did in this study as well. So we looked at good readers and poor readers regardless of their familiar risk. Okay, so these are the brains, the white matter tracks in preschool, but then followed over time in the ones who turn out good versus poor readers. And we could show that the rate, the developmental rate, is significantly different between the kids who turn out to be good readers versus kids who turn out to be poor readers. Okay, so that brings us to the READ study. And I'm going to quickly tell you about the READ study. So the READ study we did in collaboration with John Gabrieli, my postdoctoral advisor at MIT, a couple of years ago. This started in 2011. And what we did this time is we went into schools and we screened 1,500 kindergartners with a 30-minute screening battery. And then we oversampled risk kids, scanned those, had a control group as well, and then followed them behaviorally until the end of second grade. We only scanned 160. We had EG, but we did not scan 1,500. Some people are like, whoa, how did we do that? I want to tell you a short story because I think you will be really interested in this. So when we first started the study, we went to districts. We said, ta-da! We are from Boston Children's and MIT and Harvard Medical School, and we're going to go into your school for free, and we screen every incoming kindergartner with a 30-minute battery, and we do it on your terms. If you want them to be screened in the summer before they start school, fine. If you want us to screen 1 hour every day over 8 weeks, we do it. If you want us to do it on the weekends, we do it. If you want us to go to the houses of the kids, we do it. Whatever you tell us works. We don't want to disrupt your school day. We also, by the way, will give you the results 2 weeks later, and we'll do professional development and tell you what to do with these kids in the next 3 years. And we do a brand awareness day, and we'll sign a research contract that gives you a partner school, so you get free professional development for the next 5 years. So we thought we had hundreds of schools and school districts in line saying, me, I want to sign up. No. We had schools who said, hell, sorry, oh no, we don't want you anywhere close to us. And we said, why not? And I'll never forget this one administrator. She looked at me and said, you know what will happen if MIT and Harvard will identify children at risk in kindergarten? You know what the parents will do? They will run into my school and say, you need to do something right now. It's like, I can guarantee you, these kids will still struggle in third grade. We have everything in place to address it in third grade. I don't want to move my resources, retrain my teachers. We'll catch them in third grade and they will be fine. So that just illustrates the problem, the policy problem. Even though the research suggests we can identify children early, we should remediate them early, that doesn't mean that the schools are ready to do this. But we have schools, so this is where they are, and so some schools were really poor, where 80% of the kids were on reduced or free lunch. So that's, you get free lunch if your family makes less than $25,000 a year. And we have about 50% minority children. So out of this study came this really interesting main class analysis. So basically, what it does is, it looks at groups that are very homogeneous within each group, but very heterogeneous in between groups, okay? So here you have IQ, phonological awareness, working memory, rapid understanding, letter, sound, knowledge, and 0 here is average. You can see that there is a group of kids who are average on all of these measures. But then it gets interesting. So you have these kids that are average on most measures, but then have really low rapid understanding. So we follow them and see what kind of problems do they have later. For instance, reading fluency. And we can then see which kids will develop which problems and should they get different remediation early on. We also looked at the white matter again in this study and replicated what this was earlier, showing that the phonological awareness, here blending words, correlates with the volume of the white matter. Okay, so we have kids who have a really strong familiar risk, but they turn out perfectly fine. And I think this is the most interesting group we're looking at right now. Because the question is, so just to show you, people have suggested protective factors, such as high IQ or vocabulary knowledge. But the question is, the kids who have familiar risk but turn out really good readers, do they show the same hyperactivation in the brain? And is there something else that they develop in order to compensate? Or do they just have reduced genetic liability and they just look like typical kids? So we looked into the literature. And this is work by Fumiko Heft and John Gabrielli in middle schoolers. And what they could show is that middle schoolers who have dyslexia, who improve 3 years later, were showing more activation in the right hemisphere compared to the ones who did not respond to intervention. Also in our whole study, we could show that among all the kids who have a strong familiar risk, the ones who turn out good readers compared to poor readers have a stronger superior longitudinal fasciculus than the white matter tract in the right hemisphere. Okay, so we use the same task here, and this is what we found. So first of all, if you look, so in blue are the kids who have no familiar risk and are typical readers. In red are the ones who have a familiar risk and are typical readers. And in green are the ones who have a familiar risk but have a reading disability. So we could show that the hyperactivation in the left hemisphere, so the reduced activation, is still there if you have a familiar risk but you develop typical skills. What we showed is that there's a right inferior frontal region, so in the right hemisphere, there was only activated, this is a multivariate pattern analysis, distinguished very well the kids who have a familiar risk who turn out typical readers compared to the ones who do not turn out, who do not have a familiar risk but turn out typical readers. So this suggests that they have a compensatory network, right? So the same dysfunction but a compensatory network. Okay, so I'm running a little behind. Let me quickly give you another. Okay, so let's look at where could this come from. And so there's two ideas. One could be that these kids start
basically form a right hemispheric network. And we looked actually at the corpus callosum, which is the bridge here between the two hemispheres. And what we could show is that indeed, the kids who have a familiar risk, but turn out typical, have the highest FA in the corpus callosum, followed by the ones who have a familiar risk, but turn out to have reading impairment compared to the ones without a familiar risk. So the idea here is that maybe that these dyslexia susceptibility genes are not only leading to atypical development in the right hemisphere, but they could also be seen as a protective factor in the corpus callosum, enabling you to build a bilateral reading network, which then leads you to better reading habits. We also looked at environmental variables who could do this. And could show that home literacy, so how many books you have at home and how often someone reads to you, correlates with the right here, offensive motor prefrontal region, only in kids with a frontal areas. And so if you want to read more about this, there's a paper that just came out yesterday, I think, that describes this. Okay, so the last couple minutes, I'll do more things. One is, we looked at infants too, right? So we're thought, okay, we see all these differences in preschoolers, how about in infancy? So the way we do this is, we basically ask the parents to come in. They're like, okay, great, you're here, it's 3 p.m., now put your baby to sleep. The baby sleeps. We put baby in super loud alarm machine, the baby sleeps for 2 hours, and then we get wonderful structural and functional images. No, it's actually brutally hard. We have a brilliant team. So we do this during nap time and during the night. So a lot of my RAs, so I have an open RA position if somebody's interested, and they have to work a lot of nights, right? And so basically we wait till they sleep and then we tiptoe them together, and they often wake up and then we rock them again and then we tiptoe them back. So we're really good at putting other people's babies to sleep. Yes. And so we do also fMRI, so they're listening to rhyming and to backward-forward speech. We're looking at resting states, white matter, and spectroscopy, but that's for another talk. Here you see we started this 7 years ago. This is my daughter. She's now the upcoming 3rd grader. That's when she started this. So we do this in different countries. So here you see how we do this in Bangladesh in order to look at kids who grow up in slums versus high middle-class families to look at their brain. Okay, so this is how the arcuate fasciculus looks like for babies. And then what we did is we compared. And we could show that kids with a familiar risk compared to without show lower FA in these segments. We then followed them over many years. And here you see data we now have 28 who just turned 5. And we could show that the FA in this segment in infancy is highly correlated with the phonological awareness when they're 5 years old. So if you look cross-sectionally, there's almost identical segments that seem to be showing lower FA in infancy, pre-readers, beginning readers, and fluent readers. All right, skipping the resting state data, but they show similar results. So what do we do about it? We are doing a support model now. So we do a lot of teacher training, a lot of professional development, a lot of policy work in order to move this dyslexia paradox to the support model. And we developed screeners. Let me show you an example. So we've developed a tablet-based screener now, and this was in strong collaboration with a lot of teachers, which will, it's a game, and you can, it's self-administered. You hand it to a 4 or 5-year-old, and it will screen for early signs of reading impairment in about 15 to 20 minutes, but you could do it in little segments. So you can see it's called, right now, the Boston Children's Language Literacy Screener is still a whole name. And so it's a whole game, just to show you some screenshots here. So basically you walk through this and you do tasks like vocabulary tasks or rapid understanding tasks or the oral comprehension listening tasks. We also provide what we call EBRS, which is evidence-based response to screening. So we then tell the teachers, the parents, whoever screens, pediatricians, etc., what to do next. And this is not showing interventions directly through the app, but giving you a lot of resources, a lot of professional development in a platform for the different professionals. Okay, so to finalize this, I showed you this. We talked about genetics, brain, perception, cognition, environmental factors influencing the reading development. We talked about the different characteristics of the brain with dyslexia. So what are the educational implications? So we hope that this will reduce clinical and psychological and social implications of dyslexia, that it will help underpin the training of professionals, including educators. We hope that it will help with subtyping, early intervention, early policy change, as well as improve psychosocial development, so reduce child stress, parental stress. We're working a lot on bills. It's almost through. We already have 11 states in the United States that have mandatory screening for dyslexia in kindergarten. Massachusetts will hopefully be on the list soon. And so I missed Professor Howard Jones yesterday, but we completely agree that we have to talk and we do a lot of work with educators. So this is just a list of the outreach we did in the last 12 months just with educators. So this is us in front of the State House here. So we do a lot of parent association councils, a lot of teacher training. Yeah, I couldn't do this with a lot of my team and great funders and the wonderful families. And this is my youngest performing his first infant awards. Thank you.
Thank you, a very thorough and engaging talk.
We do have time for a few questions. If we have some in the audience, there's one back.
Thank you very much, that was fantastic, really interesting again. I was really intrigued by your work on the compensatory network or atypical network in very good readers. And I'd like you to talk more about what you think the implications might be. If when reading, these compensated readers are using a differential network, should that be informing intervention practices to boost alternative ways of reading, or should it instead be focused on remediation of the traditional networks that are underactivated in those readers? And I don't know if there's an answer to that, or should we be doing both?
There is no answer yet, but I get the question all the time from the teachers. They're asking me, so how am I going to teach to the right hemisphere? I'm like, no. So basically there's a couple of thoughts. One is, if this is really seen that early, which is before the onset of reading instruction, we should just keep in mind that maybe reading instruction has to look a little bit different in kids who have a strong familiar risk. How different? I think that needs to a couple of further studies need to show this. So, for instance, we would love to do a trial where we have kids with a familiar risk and then give them various different interventions and see how they facilitate the development of the right hemispheric network. The question is also, how early could we see this? Could this be a marker? So I was never a fan of like, oh, should we scan all children, etc., right? But that could be the idea if it shows high sensitivity and specificity to see if someone has a really strong familiar risk. You could see if how the development of the corpus callosum is and make some informed decisions. But I think that's more not very practical. But I agree with you that we really have to maybe rethink how we teach the kids with a familiar risk compared to the ones without. And how early we start with, teaching practices. So if we see this, and we will be able to answer this as early as infancy, we have to start thinking about what can we do with a 2, a 3, and a 4-year-old. And I think April Banistich, a friend, actually has 2 papers suggesting what you potentially could do with infants and young in order to remediate some of these networks.
My question is kind of related. I guess I'm interested in the specificity of these brain measures in particular. So I noticed that the screening tool is all behavioural stuff, and I wonder how you see the brain measures kind of feeding into that, because they're only useful in terms of diagnostic purposes or predicting who's going to be a bad reader if you can.
Yeah, So me doing MRI, fMRIs was never in order to develop a diagnostic tool. I think that maybe some people thought about this 10 years ago, but I think we moved away from this. This is more to really informing us about the underlying mechanism, how early interventions could look like, how early can we see differences, how many subtypes do we have, etc., etc., etc. So I've never seen this part of my research being like a diagnostic tool or anything. But the screening, which will not screen for dyslexia, will screen for early risk of dyslexia, almost like a high cholesterol for heart disease kind of model. We're currently doing a big validation study to look at the specificity and sensitivity. But we think that we can be a little relaxed with, I think it's better to over-identify children than to miss, because what you would give them will for sure not harm them. So it's not like ADHD where maybe, a medication may influence brain development. So I think we can be a little bit more relaxed with the false alarms, but we should make sure we don't have any misses. That's how we designed the validation study right now.
Cool. Any more questions?
Well, thank you, Nadine. That was really a great talk. I have 2 things that came to my mind. One is that most of your data, for good reasons, is based on family risk. But there are also kids who do not have a family risk, but maybe at risk for some or another reason. I mean, you have now this large screening data that could be kids who are low in their performance. I wondered if you have any data about that and prediction about it.
Yeah. Yeah, we do. So the READ study is actually primarily low-income kids, and we did not screen for familiar risk. So we have the data, but we just have basically a community sample of these 1,500, and then we oversampled the risk kids. So these are a lot of the kids who have low vocabulary, low oral listening comprehension, etc. We are currently doing some analyses to tease apart these subtypes and to see how this develops over time.
Because, and that touches on the next point. At some point you were showing this nice picture of the umbrella where you talk about reading difficulty, and then one bit of it was labeled as dyslexia. You didn't go into the other bit, but you said you could comment on that, so maybe this is a bit of opportunity to do.
Yeah. So the app, the screening platform that we are developing will screen for both. So it will screen for the more classic dyslexia, meaning a phonological awareness and low rapid automatized naming, but it will also detect the kids who have low vocabulary and low oral listening comprehension. So we're giving them these really complex sentences like the self, like the bear with the small black and yellow striped back is standing behind the tree, and then you have 4 pictures, right? So where you really have to understand the syntax as well as the vocabulary. And so ideally, so right now we work with a lot of interventionists who will vet the platform which we call the evidence-based response to screening platform. And we are working really closely with them because we think that these kids need something in addition, right? So research has shown that they do in general benefit from the classical structured literacy or often Gillingham-Wilson approaches, but they often need something else, like a good vocabulary training. So we found a couple of very good ones that seem to really boost vocabulary and oral listening comprehension. So there will be a lot of recommendations also on audiobooks for the different levels and what parents can do at home in order to boost it. So we'll definitely look at this in the brain as well as with the screening platform.
Right, any more questions from here? Whilst Mike's going there, I'm a question as well. I'm going to sneak in abusing my chair position. Hang on 1 second. So it was in the bold longitudinal study, you said that you would offer advice at the same time. It seems to me.
For research, yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry, maybe it's the wrong study, but you were offering you were getting the screening data and you're following them longitudinally, but you're also feeding back and making suggestions on what to do. So it's a struggle that I had many years ago in my research. Actually, how have you managed that?
Yeah, so we felt that ethically we cannot just walk out and go back in our ivory tower and say, oh, we have all these kids that will develop a reading impairment. How great, we can nicely distinguish them, right? So we offered professional development, and then we closely monitored the response to the professional development. Some teachers didn't implement anything, right? They were just going back to what they did before. Some really made an effort. Some districts really made an effort. We have all this info. We also have whether there was an outside tutor, how many hours, what kind of tutor technique, etc. So we have that data, but it will take us years to dig into this.
But you're still getting different outcomes. So whatever compensatory things are happening, they're not enough to eliminate the difficulties.
Yes.
Sorry, thank you.
My question is about typical readers who succeed in learning to read, and when should we start that teaching process? Over the past generation in the U.S., we have pushed that younger and younger and younger. Is that a good thing to have done? Should we move it back? Where do optimally in child development do we introduce these things?
Yeah, that's exactly a question I have, right? So I think that is another really great study that imaging could help with, to look at reading readiness. Can the brain tell us when the brain is ready to learn to read, right? So I think the discussion in the US was a bit misinformed by the studies that were done in Europe with the more orthographic, transparent languages, right? So in Finland, you start much later, age 7, and they all turn out to be really good readers for many different reasons. But also, they have one of the best, correspondence between the sounds and the letters, right? So I think someone has to systematically look at what the role of orthographic transparency and the age of onset of reading instruction is, because it is harder to learn to read in English, a lot harder. And so, and it's a lot more mapping sounds onto symbols. So I think, in my opinion, we should start early and not wait till age 7. But I think brain imaging could help us if we know how a brain has to look like in order to learn to read, which we are far away from. We don't know.
Great. Any last questions?